This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Man, it has now come down to two in the Western Conference. And of course, it has to be the two best teams who've been doing it all season long. And we've been waiting for this matchup. They showed it to us back in the beginning of the season, and it led itself all the way to this point. So it definitely got a lot to discuss when it comes to the Western Conference Finals preview. But more importantly, we also get to talk about the team that the San Antonio Spurs just ousted in our edition of Go On Git. So much to discuss out in the Wild Wild West. I'm going to roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, my brother from another mother, runs www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. What's good, Mr. Shaw? How you living down there in Fort Lauderdale, brother?
I'm chilling as always, man. And as always, it's great to be here to talk NBA hoops. It's nitty-gritty time, right? It's crunch time, Western Conference Finals. And, it's going to be an amazing show. Just talking about two teams that I think have been on a collision path for a long time. We haven't got to see them in their current forms play against each other as great as they've been. They've had a lot of great regular season battles. But these two teams, since the Warriors kind of became in the upper echelon, haven't gotten to play the San Antonio Spurs. So it's going to be some great conversation. But as always, salute to all defense listeners of NBA Baseline. Great to be here. Can't wait to jump into this combo, man.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. And you actually have kind of set the stage for how we're actually going to start our previews, because when you look at this Golden State Warriors team, this is a team that's been in the making over the course of the last 4 years. In that 4 years, not only have the Warriors won a championship, the Spurs have won a championship, but for all of our discussions and how both of these teams have been so dominant, they have not crossed each other's paths, or in the mindset, they haven't crossed each other's paths at the peak of their abilities. And I think now we kind of get to see that. It's kind of unfortunate because when this had taken place, Shaw, it was on the back end of Tim Duncan. Now they've replaced Tim Duncan with LaMarcus Aldridge. So we got a lot to discuss when we talk about this matchup. I think it's going to be definitely the more intriguing of the finals matchups to look forward to. And it could be as advertised, with both of these teams fighting their way. Clearly, the Warriors being the more dominant, getting with their path, but the Spurs fighting their way, to solidify themselves as being the second best team in the Western Conference. So we'll definitely talk about that in our preview. And then, of course, our segment of the drop. We'll talk about the team the San Antonio Spurs ousted in the Houston Rockets. Where does this team go from here? Is this another season of overachievement? Or are they right on the path of where they need to be in as far as in the discussions of one of the elite teams that is going to be discussed in the next coming years in the Western Conference? So a lot to get into. We certainly appreciate everyone tuning into the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Hashtag up the baseline. Let us know who you are, what we're about. You definitely always like to throw the questions out there on the social media side, and we always love to respond. Shout out to our people, 16 Wins a Ring. Be sure to check out the Baseline NBA podcast on the 16 Wins a Ring website. Definitely the NBA content that you need to get your feed for what's going on in the NBA playoffs. You are available on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM. Also available on iHeartRadio, Google Music, and the Roku channel. So download any one of those platforms. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things in the association. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown. Time to break it down.
To the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And of course, the breakdown is going to be the preview with reference to the Western Conference Finals. This is where it all comes down. The best team in the NBA, the Golden State Warriors, leading in the forefront of the Western Conference. And the team that followed up right behind them, the San Antonio Spurs, who placed as the second seed. They made their way to the Western Conference Finals, certainly by no easy stretch, with the opposition of teams like the Memphis Grizzlies and the Houston Rockets in their path. Downtrodden by severe injuries, this team found a way to persevere. And Shaw, when we talk about this San Antonio Spurs team, the one thing that sticks out in my mind is while they will suffer without having Tony Parker, while we don't know the current status of Kawhi Leonard, whether he'll be 100% coming into at least the first game of this Western Conference Finals, you certainly cannot count out Greg Popovich and his platoon of men who are going to play hard, play strong, and more importantly, play without fear.
Right. I think that's a great segue into, the mindset of the San Antonio Spurs, kind of dispatching the Houston Rockets in the way that they did, with a truly, truly team effort. Guys like Jonathan Simmons being inserted to the starting lineup and stepping up. Patty Mills, who's always been great, primarily in a reserve role, but he goes into the starting lineup in the last game of the season, last game of that conference semifinals. There, he does a great job there. Dejounte Murray comes off the bench, and after starting a game or two, then he goes on the bench and then comes in and produces in a great role for the San Antonio Spurs. As always, Pop just knows what buttons to push and to make things work for his roster. And that's going to be the key in this series against the Golden State Warriors. Do guys like Jonathan Simmons and Dejounte Murray go out here and really now contribute in the same way they did in the Houston series? Can young players with that type of pressure that's going to be on them with the Golden State Warriors coming at them from all angles offensively, are they able to continue to play great defense and then still contribute on the offensive side of basketball, where San Antonio is really going to need them, especially as you alluded to, if Kawhi is not 100% throughout the series? I think it really comes down to San Antonio's intangibles and their bench. Can they really continue to keep up with the Golden State Warriors when the starters are off the floor?
One of the things that I look at with this matchup, and I don't know if it's going to be to the detriment of the San Antonio Spurs, but it will be something that I am definitely looking forward to, is the backcourt matchup. And the reason why I say that is because, certainly Greg Popovich got away with using Jonathan Simmons the way that he has in the matchup against the Houston Rockets. If I am Kawhi Leonard, you have to pick and choose, who he's going to have to defend, because there is clearly a three-headed offensive monster with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant. The interesting thing is that now that Tony Parker is down to injury, where should the focus be, Shaw? Because you can certainly run Patty Mills out there, and I think for the most part, he'll be able to keep up with Steph. He won't be able to stop Steph, but he'll be able to keep up with him. Something that I feared wasn't going to be as effective having Tony Parker on the floor. But if you're telling me that Tony Parker is your most effective ball handler, distributor, play creator, someone who can get into the paint, force Steph Curry to work more on the defensive side of the basketball, then I could definitely say advantage, Golden State Warriors. But if Patty Mills equally is someone of a spark plug, he obviously moves quicker laterally than Tony Parker. He obviously can be a spark plug. Is it more so to the advantage that Greg Popovich now can use players like Patty Mills and Jonathan Simmons a little bit more with versatility and more angst, because he doesn't have the luxury of leaning on his veteran Tony Parker? Oh, and by the way, he still does have Manu Ginobili, who probably still has one more run left in him to help get the Spurs to the finals.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the series, you kind of envision it in the same way that you described, where the Spurs are chasing the Warriors all over the court. I think what they're going to do is they're going to have a lot of doubles, and some of the bigs will hedge out on screens and on the back cuts too, to just kind of make sure that the guys aren't able to operate in space. One caveat that Pop might decide to do is, and again, not to say that it can't happen, but he might decide to try to make Klay Thompson beat them, and may try to make Klay beat them on the post. So maybe it's you switch off Mills and you put Danny Green on Curry, and Kawhi is going to be guarding KD, and then it's Patty Mills as guarding Klay Thompson. And then you're hoping, okay, Klay's going to have to try to beat us with the post. And not to say that the Warriors won't do that, and that Klay Thompson can't carry their offense, but that's not obviously their optimized, offense. They want to be able to, run and gun, set their down screens, have Curry come off cuts and shoot the corner three, KD doing the same thing, Draymond kind of facilitating that offense. I think that's one strategy that Pop can do. He might want to concede to Klay and not let Curry and KD get off as much also, but I think it's also going to be a matter of what LaMarcus Aldridge does defensively. We know he's got to contribute offensively, but is he a guy who can be a deterrent? And again, not necessarily a shot blocker, although he did block some shots in that Rocket series, which I was surprised to. He dug in on that side of the basketball. It really does matter. It's going to matter what Pop wants to do with his bigs. LaMarcus and Pau Gasol, are they going to play the help defense to kind of keep some of those guys out of the paint and chase them off the three-point line?
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our preview of the Western Conference Finals matchup between the number one seed Golden State Warriors and the 2-seeded San Antonio Spurs. So a couple of things to mention as we still kind of look down, at the starting lineup, obviously the bench. One thing that will be very interesting, in my opinion, Shaw, is how the San Antonio Spurs front court will play the Golden State Warriors front court. It's completely a contrast of styles. Guys like David Lee, guys like LaMarcus Aldridge love to play on the blocks. LaMarcus, hangs out on the wing, finds his sweet spot, shoots the mid-range jumper, likes to shoot that turnaround J. David Lee is someone that likes to cut, and get himself deep into the basket, has the sweet little lefty hook, has an up and underneath, which I think can always be a benefactor for the San Antonio Spurs to quickly get the Golden State Warriors into early foul trouble. There's an aggressive state of mind when guys like Draymond Green, Zaza Pachulia, JaVale McGee, they love to go for the shot blocks. At times they get a little jumpy. My question is will Popovich look to exploit that and use that a lot more frequently in the early stages of this playoff series because of the fact that he realizes that he may not have a healthy Kawhi Leonard? And look, let's keep it real. LaMarcus Aldridge is still a question mark. While he has shown up a couple of times at the course of you can just chalk it up to the fact that he just loves to play the Houston Rockets. Like maybe the best you'll ever see of LaMarcus Aldridge in the playoffs is whenever he plays the Houston Rockets. We really haven't seen this kind of effectiveness with consistency over the course of the two series. And this matchup with the Golden State Warriors, if we're saying that the Golden State Warriors is arguably the best defensive team left, not just in the playoffs, but ultimately was in the NBA's regular season to some degree, this might be a bad situation for LaMarcus Aldridge because he's compromising himself by not being consistently aggressive through the course of the series.
Well, I think when it comes to the bigs, the real question for me is how much does Pop invest in them and trying to, kind of slow down the pace a little bit. San Antonio is one of those weird situations where they were 27th, I think, in pace in the regular season, but they had the 9th best offensive rating. So that means to show you they're supremely efficient. But they've gone away from a style for a couple seasons ago where they were even running up and down a little bit faster and getting up and down the court. That kind of slowed down this year, and that's something that they used against Golden State. And for me, I feel like there's only one real game in which these two teams played, and that was the beginning in the first game of the regular season. I think every other game, but that was marred by injuries or people sitting out and things of that nature. But some statistical knowledge to throw out there. The Spurs, according to an article by John Schumann on NBA.com, they grabbed 35% of the offensive rebounds available against the Golden State Warriors. They murdered them on the glass, and that was a major question that we had about Golden State coming into the season. Would they be able to rebound and defend the paint at an acceptable level? And then we saw KD and obviously Draymond, but those two guys were doing a great job. KD averaging the most blocks he had. But San Antonio was just able to get so many more second chance points against Golden State in that one game that we saw at the beginning of the season. So I think that's where Pop is going to maybe invoke the power of the bigs, if you will, really try to murder those guys on the glass, not so much in terms of worrying about JaVale and Zaza, jumping at shots and things of that nature. Is like, hey, make sure that you get in there and dig in and root those guys out and get an offensive rebound so we can get a second chance opportunity.
All right. So and if we're talking about it from, in light of that, Paul Gasol, David Lee, LaMarcus Aldridge, Dwayne Dedmon. Okay. How deep do you think Popovich is going to have to go in order to figure out a way to pull this out in the series?
Well, I think that's
because we've seen Popovich, he shortens his lineup. He very rarely ever extends unless it's due to extraordinary circumstances. And this is an extraordinary circumstance because he doesn't have Tony Parker. But how deep does he really go in this lineup? Is he going to lean on his horses a heck of a whole lot in order to see this thing through, with Golden State? We've talked about that as well, too, at times. Some coaches lean too heavily on their players and don't go deep enough into the bench, whether it's to find a spark or to relieve their players when they need them at critical stretches to make, certain shots. How deep do you think he goes?
Well, I think it's a read situation, and it always is for Pop, and that's what makes him a great coach. That's what makes any coach a great coach in terms of what buttons do you push. And we've seen throughout the series where I keep alluding to the emergency break glass situation where, hey, you know what? Well, let's throw this guy out here, like when the Chicago Bulls threw Anthony Morrow out there for in the Celtics series, just like where does that come from? But he's looking for a spark, so I think Pop is not afraid to do that. He trusts his guys, even down to rookies, and even though you can say Dejounte Murray, he didn't really want to have to play him, but the Parker injury kind of forced him that situation. Well, now he's gained some confidence as a result of being out there in that series against the Houston Rockets. Bertans, we've seen come out, in stretches as well, too, kind of unexpectedly. So Pop's going to do what he needs to do. And he's always going to read the game flow and kind of figure out, okay, well, what's a button that I can push now that the Warriors may not be expecting in this situation. But I really do feel like the Spurs' best chance in this series is to kind of continue to do what they do and kind of slow things down at a pace that doesn't behoove the Golden State Warriors and muck it up a little bit, make sure that they are physical and can get the rebounds and get second chance points, because really, to me, I think that's their best shot. They're not like how Houston was, where they have all this offense coming from, every angle where they can shoot all these threes. And then again, they have guys who can make shots, but not at the same pace that the Golden State Warriors can do.
All right, Shaw, who do you have listed as your X factor player for the San Antonio Spurs, your wild card?
Yeah, I think it's Jonathan Simmons, who alluded to a little bit earlier. If he can continue to be a two-way player, on a lighter scale, so to speak, but a guy who can give you 10 to 12 points coming off the bench and play the defense that we've seen him play in that Houston series, that's a huge lift for the San Antonio Spurs. And we know Mono's getting a little bit older, and I like how you alluded to, like, yeah, he may still have one more run in him for this series, because he was a dog in the Memphis series and played one great game. He was a dog in the Houston series and again played one great game and ended up saving the game with the blocking James Harden's 3-point shot. So a veteran guy like that is always a wild card. But to me, I'm looking at Jonathan Simmons to see, can he continue this rise? And hey, we all know he's playing for a contract. Guy's making under $1 million this year. He's going to be a free agent. I think he's opened up the eyes and the pocketbooks of general managers going into the summer.
My wild card, I know this sounds real crazy. Aside from the obvious, because again, I look at LaMarcus Aldridge and you don't know what you're going to get from him. So I think the onus really comes down to Paul Gasol. And you alluded to the point about how the San Antonio Spurs murders the Golden State Warriors when it comes to offensive rebounding. I think Paul Gasol is their most effective offensive rebounder. He's obviously their best front court passer, and he actually is the one person that can make LaMarcus Aldridge play at a level that he doesn't have to put it on his shoulders to be the best front court player for this team. In other words, there's just certain things that Paul Gasol is doing in this stage of his career, which is accentuating to alleviate the burden for LaMarcus Aldridge having to do everything, to like how Tim Duncan used to be, in the prime of his career. And so to me, I think Paul Gasol is going to be a key factor from a starter's position. But from a frontline position off the bench, I think it's David Lee. We've seen Greg Popovich literally get all up in David Lee's nostrils at courses of the series against the Houston Rockets. And I don't think it's just by way of saying, oh my God, why am I paying this man this money? There's a reason why they brought this guy back here. And it's not because this guy is seething with revenge to take it out against the Golden State Warriors for ditching him after they won the championship. I honestly believe that he thinks that David Lee can actually contribute in this kind of matchup simply because he's the best midway kind of player. He's not too big and he's not too small. It's just a question of, can David Lee do what's necessary to stay on the floor long enough so that Greg Popovich doesn't lose confidence in him? If that is the case, that is another added piece that can combat the depth lineup that the Golden State Warriors throw out there. And it's also an alleviation when they can't keep Kawhi Leonard on the basketball court to get additional front court scoring from their second unit.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great point, because Lee does have some knowledge of the Warriors, obviously, and he might have a little extra motivation to play better than he would ordinarily. But again, he's going to have to do it defensively to earn Pop's trust on a regular basis.
Right, I agree with you. If he does that, if he can do enough where he can and look, let's put it like this. This is a great matchup, Shaw, for David Lee. Not like the Houston Rockets series, because the Houston Rockets is so all offensive, right? There's a little bit of balance with the Golden State Warriors, but there's also a matchup level that is equivalent to what he can do offensively to make the Golden State Warriors front court work a little bit harder, even force their backcourt players to work a little bit harder. And so I think that it favors, because remember, the Golden State Warriors will allow teams to come back into basketball games. The Golden State Warriors, while they're great defensively, they have their lapses. And for a team like the San Antonio Spurs, who can struggle at times to find their groove, so to speak, a guy like David Lee can be an easy spark plug. This is the kind of game where he can have a double-double and we don't even realize it, because we look at the score and we're saying, oh my God, this team is in the one teens, right? But the Warriors win by like 120 to 110. And then you're saying to yourself, well, damn, David Lee had 12 and 13 and stuff, because the Warriors will allow you to do that, because sometimes the matchup plays more to his favor for that.
Yeah, well, it really is going to be about his activity. Like I said, we talked about the defense, but even his activity offensively and how Pop would decide to try to move him around a little bit. So is he going to be the screener on pick and roll or pick and pop per se, or is it going to be coming off that weak side, and looking for like kind of a dive cut, where Kawhi or maybe Patty Mills is kind of driving to the lane? That's the biggest issue that I worry about San Antonio is, will they get enough penetration from their guard spots or from Kawhi to really make the defense of the Warriors kind of rotate? And without Parker, he's obviously their best penetrator. That becomes a huge question for the Spurs, because a lot of David Lee's offense comes off kind of cuts and things of that nature. He's not the same pick and pop guy or pick and roll guy he used to be. So a guy like him, he's going to need somebody to manufacture some offense for him, because he's not going to go down there and do straight post ups, even if KD's trying to guard him. I can't see him going there and then trying to be a physical brute on Durant. And he's certainly not going to do that against Draymond Green. So there's some definitely opportunity for him to be effective in this series, but it really is going to start with the penetration of the San Antonio Spurs.
All right, you're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we're giving you our preview of the Western Conference Finals matchup between the Golden State Warriors and the San Antonio Spurs. That game starts off this weekend. So let's go ahead and look to the other side of the basketball. We talked about the Spurs. Let's talk about the Golden State Warriors, Shaw. Look, everybody sees this basketball team as the heads-on favorite, not to just come out of the West, but possibly to win this whole thing, right? Like, it doesn't matter who may come out of the East, whether it be the Cavs or, whoever the winner might be, as we're recording the show, whoever the winner might be between the Boston Celtics and the Washington Wizards. But I feel like there's so much momentum now riding on the fact that we've been waiting to kind of see this matchup occur between the Warriors and the Spurs. And I'm beginning to wonder who really needs to shine most when it comes to the Golden State Warriors. Like, who needs this series more than anything? I'm leaning more to the idea that it's Steph Curry, although I do kind of feel like it's somewhat of an unfair advantage because of the fact that Tony Parker is not playing in this series. But I still lean on the idea that, given the way that Steph Curry has been playing through the course of the first two series, he needs to keep that momentum going. I don't know if I necessarily worry about Kevin Durant or Klay Thompson or Draymond Green. I think I worry more so about Steph Curry, his mind state, and the groove that he's in, which is one hell of a groove. He has certainly looked so much better this playoff run than he has in the previous two.
Well, health is obviously a huge concern, and that he's healthy this playoffs as he wasn't, last year. But
concern for the opposition, I assume that we're saying, right?
True, indeed. But you've been on Curry's case these playoffs, and continuing to say that he needs to prove himself in some way or form. And I think he's acquitted himself well. But again, they've only played 8 games, and that's the one thing I think when you talk about Golden State, I don't want to say you're worried about them, but they haven't really been truly battle tested in these playoffs, haven't lost one game, and that's obviously speaks to their dominance. But the Spurs are a different animal than the two teams that they played previously. They are a veteran-laden team that has a lot of experience. They understand what it takes to get to a championship level, and have an amazing coach in Popovich. So you feel like, okay.
And one more thing to add on that, Shaw. The San Antonio Spurs team is a Spurs team and an organization that expects themselves to be in this position every single year, which is something that was sorely lacking with the other teams that we have watched through the course of this Western Conference playoff series, right? Like teams like the Utah Jazz, teams like the Los Angeles Clippers, teams like the Houston Rockets, right? The Portland Trail Blazers, all of these guys. For some reason, we can have confidence about the players, but we don't know if we have complete confidence in the team and the organization that they expect themselves to be in this position right now, which is playing in the Western Conference Finals.
Well, I mean, again, like you said, they expect to be here, and this is a matchup that I think that quietly they're not an organization with a lot of bravado, but I think they've been looking for this challenge and looking to kind of answer this question that maybe even fans have been wondering to see between these two teams who still have the two best records in the NBA over the last couple of seasons, and that's including the Cavaliers' runs, if you say. So San Antonio and Golden State have been the best regular season teams for the last couple
Right.
of
Nobody's
years.
even talking about how last year, while it was this team, this unstoppable force about the Warriors winning 73 games, it was the San Antonio Spurs was pushing them to have to do that. It wasn't just a question of
7 or something.
yeah, it wasn't like a question of, they won 73 games and just ran roughshod against everyone else in the NBA. Like nobody had eclipsed 55 wins. The damn Spurs were over 65, so.
And in any other normal season, the Spurs would have been the talk of the town.
Talk of the town, exactly.
But that just wasn't the case for them. But getting back to the point in terms of like the potential X factors, well, while you've been on Steph Curry's case all playoffs, I'm on Klay Thompson's. And this guy, who was so great last year in the playoffs, especially when Curry went down and they obviously didn't have Durant. He's only shooting 40%, through the playoffs this year, 36% from three, which still is above league average and very good, but averaging 16.1 points per game. And he's a guy who averaged 20 points per game in the regular season. And you just want to see him kind of get his confidence back a little bit. And I really do feel like, what I said earlier, the Spurs may challenge him to do exactly that. Mm-hmm. My second point, though, with besides Klay Thompson, something you alluded to as well a little bit earlier is, it really is kind of the trio of bigs for the Golden State Warriors. They have to play well, I think, on both sides of the basketball. And I'm not talking about Draymond Green. I'm talking about JaVale McGee, Zaza Pachulia, and even David West coming off the bench.
I'm glad you brought him up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Those three guys have to be, have a positive net rating when they're on the floor. And again, we know JaVale is going to do JaVale type things and try to volleyball spike balls into the net and come off a screen and fall down and things of that nature. But if he can string some couple good plays together, I think that'll be obviously positive for Golden State and something that they need to have from him from a big standpoint. And a guy who can also rim protect in a truly traditional way in terms of blocking shots and deterring shots, whereas Zaza is going to be more physical, trying to stand you up. The same thing with David West. They're not blocking shots out there, but they are trying to knock guys off the blocks. And those guys also set amazing screens offensively. So Zaza and West, I think they'll be, sending those pin down screens, and West will be open for pick and pop. And he's cool playing 12 to 13 minutes a game and giving you 6 to 8 points, 4 or 5 rebounds. If he can do that throughout the series, I think that's where Golden State will have a lot of success when those bigs are out there on the lineup.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned as well, too, that I really like about David West and JaVale McGee, and I don't know if whether or not it's something that I just don't see from Zaza Pachulia enough. You know how I am, man. I think Zaza Pachulia is a solid player. How he continues to get starter minutes at times just completely befuddles me. I feel like
he's not right now. I mean,
no, I know he's
the
not.
Playoffs, they're
but when
West is 15, he's 15. Miguel's like 11.
Right. No,
McGee's
but when I say starter minutes, I'm just saying like starting the game, right? Like he's a starter, right? And I say that simply because the Warriors are fine with that. I don't know, maybe from my, what I'm looking at, I don't know if I'm necessarily fine with it. But what I do like is he's the kind of player like David West that likes to set the hard pick, then stops, right around the top of the key. He's an adequate passer. But what I like is the change when you go with JaVale or you go with David West. They're the kind of guys they have a difference to their game. One stays and can hit the mid-range. The other one shoots straight to the basket. And his athleticism adds a dimension where a guy like Steph Curry, who wants to penetrate to the basket, a guy like Klay Thompson, who's trying to get to the basket if he is not getting his three-point shot off, that it gives the Warriors another look to keep a team like the San Antonio Spurs, who like to push the Warriors further and further away, gives them more of that opportunity to set those alley-oops or, to bring on, a possible foul situation or whatever the case may be. I like that. And maybe that is something that they seriously have to consider if they want to exploit the Spurs, who I think is going to they're going to try to figure out a way to confine the space that the Warriors like to do in expanding the space. They're not going to try and confine it, but it's only going to happen if the Warriors bigs pick and start moving to the basket. They do that, they open themselves up a lot better than trying to move further away from the basket.
Yeah, well, I think at this stage of their careers right now, excuse me, where McGee might have the same level of strength as Pau Gasol to some degree, but he also has a ton more athleticism. So it really is going to be about the pace that's dictated by, these two teams. If San Antonio is able to kind of get their way and keep the bigs on the floor, well, then if McGee's out there, then he, like you said, he has to be impactful in doing what he does best in terms of flying at the rim, getting offensive rebounds, tipping the ball out back out for threes and things of that nature for his roster. But if Golden State is winning the pace battle, then you're probably going to see the death lineup a little bit more, where Draymond's the 5 and Andre Iguodala's out there, kind of as the 3 and KD as the 4, or however you want to put that out there. I think that will really determine kind of who's dictating this series one way or the other, what lineup Golden State is running out there. Because if it's a death lineup, then things are definitely going their way. If they're forced to kind of play McGee and Zaza a little bit more than they'd like to, then that would say to me that the Spurs are dictating the pace and maybe have a little bit more control in the series.
All right, Shaw. Kevin Durant, 27 points per game in the series against the San Antonio Spurs during the regular season, though the San Antonio Spurs took 2 of 3. Who do you have? To me, it sounds like your wild card or your X factor player is Klay Thompson, or do you have someone else in mind?
Well, no, it's like I said, it's twofold. It's definitely Klay, and it's also the trio of bigs for Golden State. Like I said, I'm really interested to see how Pop tries to attack Kawhi and Steph. KD and Steph. So if he's doing what I'm thinking he's going to do, then that's going to leave Klay with the most opportunity to try to impact the series offensively.
One thing that I know that we didn't get an opportunity to talk about, and I want you to touch on it real quick before we give our predictions. Isn't it not an interesting scenario to see Coach Mike Brown having to, like, I wondered, I was saying to myself that if we do get this matchup between the Spurs and the Golden State Warriors, how much onus do we look at the matchup between Greg Popovich and Mike Brown? Because I think it would have been a much intriguing matchup, the masterminds right now between Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich. What do you think of how important, like, if you had to put a percentage, of all of the components that make up what's going to be important for either the Warriors or Spurs to win this series, how much do you look at the coaching matchup to play a factor in that?
Well, I mean, it's it's an interesting question because Popovich is, by all accounts, the best coach in the NBA, right?
Right, and he spawned Mike Brown and freaking Steve Kerr.
Right,
so
right, yeah, like those are, like you said, that's kind of his offspring, if you will. Like kind of the Popovich coaching tree.
The master must now
the lineage.
The master must now show the pupils.
Yeah, and Mike Brown has had some interesting stops along his career, and he's done well in certain places, and then kind of worn out his welcome in others. But I think that the biggest thing about this is the biggest testament to this, and it's not a knock on Steve Kerr. It really is a high praise of him in terms of the culture that they've created. Where, I mean, this is not the first time this has happened. Remember, Luke Walton was the Warriors coach for the first whatever it was 27 games, 30 games it was last year, right. And the Warriors got the type of start that they got. Mike Brown now comes in as assistant, hadn't been with the roster previously, with the team previously, and now he's coaching them, throughout the playoffs. And I think he's what, 5-0. As the coach. I think Kerr left after Game 3 in the first series or something like that. I can't remember specifically, but to me, that says a lot about Golden State's culture in terms of listen, they have principles in place that these coaches are now kind of stepping in and just kind of following along with that. Now, you do wonder with Pop, the ultimate maneuver and the ultimate chess player when it comes to the coaching sidelines, when he makes a move, can Mike Brown kind of counterpunch? So I think, in short, if I was putting a percentage on it, I think Mike Brown's impact on this series is maybe 10 to 15%, but I'm not weighing it too heavily because I feel like they just know what they want to do overall in terms of the matchups and how this team wants to play. He's completely plugged in, and credit Golden State for building a culture that I shouldn't say any coach, but the coaches that have been around their team and their roster can kind of fill in the role, the same similar way that Mike Brown is doing right now.
All right, Shaw, let's go ahead and weigh it in now. So we've listed all of our goods, bads, pros, cons. We've looked at these matchups, flipped it up, smacked it, did a Belle Biv DeVoe on it. So let's go ahead and call it as we see it. How do you see this thing playing out, and who's advancing?
Yeah, it's hard to pick against Golden State in any situation, no matter what the dynamics are right now. And San Antonio, especially with Kawhi maybe being a little bit gimpy to begin the series, I feel like if he's not 100% at all, this could be over relatively quickly in a 5-game set. I still think San Antonio will always get one. I can't see this Popovich team being swept out of the playoffs. But all things being equal, I think it's going to be Golden State in 6, and 6 competitive games too. I really want to see how Golden State decides how they're going to defend Kawhi. Is it going to be KD primarily? Will they throw some Draymond on him? Iguodala will get his chances as well too. But if they can kind of cut off the head of the snake a little bit and force LaMarcus Aldridge to be a 30-point per game type of player, and Patty Mills to contribute 18 to 20 points per game, things of that nature, I think that's just a tall task for the San Antonio Spurs to do throughout the entire series. So I got the Warriors in 6, 5 if Kawhi is going to be too gimpy.
Listen, man, the Golden State Warriors have come a long way, after getting dropped by the Spurs 29 on their home court, and then also losing by like 22, in its following matchup back in March. To me, I think this just comes down to is right now the Golden State Warriors are a well-oiled machine. And, we haven't even talked a lot about their bench, which I think may play somewhat of a role. I just think that there's too many bodies that the Golden State Warriors are going to be able to throw out against the San Antonio Spurs. And when the San Antonio Spurs don't even have their best player at 100%, you have to start wondering, who are they really going to lean on, to dominate from a matchup perspective? Because even if you told me LaMarcus Aldridge, even if you told me Paul Gasol, while those guys might have somewhat of a matchup, they don't have a matchup where you have some form of confidence that they'll be able to just take over and just dominate a game. Because you just look at the way that the Warriors play collectively and individually, they just have too many dynamic pieces that they could throw at you that might throw your game off. And the only person I could see that can combat that would be a guy like Kawhi Leonard because of his versatility on both sides of the court and his propensity to just flat out come out and just dominate a game. I think people sleep on, his mentality is certainly not like the Kawhi Leonard who Popovich has kind of had a leash on the last couple of years. We said once Pop unleashes Kawhi, that we're going to see a version of him that we may be talking about him the same way that we talked about Tim Duncan after post David Robinson. And so without that as 100%, not really good, the chances for the San Antonio Spurs to figure out a way to pull this thing out. With that being said, I do like the fact that the San Antonio Spurs are still one of the best defensive teams, and they always offer the most difficult defensively to the Golden State Warriors, no matter who's on their roster and how much personnel they have. But I think that the Golden State Warriors do it in 6. And like I said, again, I might be hard on Steph Curry, but this is the kind of Steph Curry that I think the Golden State Warriors, if they had him last year, they would have flat out just killed the Cleveland Cavaliers. If he comes in here and exercises his demons, playing the kind of basketball he's been playing over the first 2 series against the San Antonio Spurs, oh man, I pity the thought about what the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be in store for, knowing that they're going to deal with that and Kevin Durant. And then to your point, Shaw, we still haven't addressed the fact that Klay Thompson is still not at his best, which he can certainly step up at any given moment and show you what he's capable of. But I have the Golden State Warriors in 6. That's it. That's our predictions. What are yours? Be sure to hit us up here when we throw it up on our social media thread. Catch us at NBA Baseline and give us your take on who do you think is going to advance for the Western Conference to represent in the NBA Finals. You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was the breakdown. Time now for the drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast, and it's our favorite tune. Go On Git! Because another one bites the dust. The Houston Rockets find themselves ousted in this year's NBA playoffs, and quite frankly, which I find to be is one of the ugliest fashions I can imagine. Now, listen, it doesn't go without saying, the Houston Rockets achieved so much this year. Maybe they overachieved. Is that a foregone conclusion? Is it not like we haven't seen this once before with the Houston Rockets? I don't know. But I figure, Shaw, wouldn't it be a great question, since this is that portion of our show where we tell the Houston Rockets to just go on Git, that we actually look at this team, give an overview, and actually call it for how we see it. They did a lot. They did it far more than what I thought a lot of people expected, becoming the 3 seed in the Western Conference. But the way that they lost to the San Antonio Spurs in a must-win situation, and to not get the kind of performance that you would have thought anyone would not have seen coming from a potential MVP or as an MVP candidate in James Harden, really boggles the mind. But again, is it not like it's been a surprise when we talk about the Houston Rockets at times?
Well, this was a team that was they overachieved. There's no two ways about that. In terms of their regular season. But I think once they got into the playoffs, people were predicting them to potentially get to the Western Conference Finals and give the Warriors all the hell they can handle with a style that was very similar to what Golden State plays. The problem is San Antonio was like, no, not on our watch. But what happened to Houston Rockets is losing that game 5 the way they did in the fashion they did in overtime, where they just ran out of gas. And D'Antoni refused to make the adjustments that were necessary. And even in terms of, even it was a matter of trying a different roster or a different person from their roster and putting them into the lineup, when his guys were clearly just winded, they were tired, they had nothing left. And they lost that game with Kawhi Leonard on the bench and hobbled with an ankle injury. That took all the wind out of their sails, man. Manu Ginobili's block of Harden, and we still don't know if that shot would have went in, even if he got it off. But just having that guy, old lefty, 39-year-old veteran, blocking your MVP candidate shot that could tie it or win the game for you, that just says, it was done. It was done for them. And then they came out in Houston, 2 in a center, and just laid in an absolute egg. No passion whatsoever. Harden, he took 2 shots in the first half, things of that nature. Like that can't be what your MVP player does. And again, the MVP race is already decided. The votes are in. It has nothing to do with whether or not he's going to win the award. Excuse me, but his performance, especially in the first half of that game, was atrocious and just a lack of interest. And then do you add fuel to the fire? And I know this is kind of an off the court topic, if you will, too. And it's just a perception, and you can be on a different side of it too. But then he's seen out in the strip club, with a bunch of girls, right after they got blown out by 35 points or whatever it was. Like that just says to me that you gave up and you're ready to go to Cancun, and as BSO likes to say, go out with your IG models in the off season. Like, get your life together, Harden. Like that's just not a good look. I mean, you have to have a little bit more respect for the game and the team and your team than even just being caught in that situation directly after that. But again, that's a side rant. This Rockets team did not perform in the latter parts of Game 5 and just didn't give a damn in Game 6 at all.
All right. So you brought up so many things. So where do I begin? Mike D'Antoni not making adjustments. Shocker, right? Like, why should I not be surprised about that? Did I not say that, I'm going to be very intrigued to see if Mike D'Antoni learned his lessons in his years being the head coach for the Phoenix Suns, in his years being the head coach for the Los Angeles Lakers, in his years being the head coach for the New York Knicks. Make adjustments, man. Make adjustments. Running your players into the ground. Make adjustments, man. Make adjustments. One thing I wanted to shed or add on top of what you were saying is, I find it interesting that James Harden pulled that stunt that he pulled, right? Like, my man got hardware like Rob Gronkowski, right? Like the Gronk. Only the Gronk gets to go and do that kind of nonsense. Not James Harden. James Harden ain't got that kind of hardware that he can afford the luxury of being caught or spotted by TMZ Sports or whoever it is that caught him out there, hanging out, quote unquote, releasing all of this tension, after taking the kind of L that he took, against the San Antonio Spurs. You go win a championship and then you lose, heartbreakingly after throwing it out all on the floor. And then you can slip as many dollar bills down G-strings and thongs as much as you want to. But to me, what that reflects is a guy who still does not have that in him. You know what I'm saying? Like, what separates the Russell Westbrook from the James Harden? What separates the LeBron James from the James Harden? There's something that has to be said. And I'm not coming down on James Harden. This is his life. It's his choice. But I want people who listen to our show and anyone who wants to sit here and try to make a case for me to say, well, James Harden is one of the most elite players. He can do this, that, and the third. I understand that. But we're talking about the NBA. And the goal in the NBA is to take your team to a championship. And if James Harden's mentality is not set in a way where he is understanding of what it's going to take for him to take his team to a championship, then there's no discussion. I don't want comparisons about Steph Curry and James Harden when Steph Curry, takes the scrutiny that he takes and we certainly say, oh, James Harden is 10 times better than Steph Curry. Okay, well, I see what Steph Curry is doing in order to kind of exercise his demons. We were saying that this was going to be what James Harden needed to be in order to exercise his demons, because we've already seen this before from him, where he doesn't show up in big games. He falls short in big games. His mentality, he takes himself out of in big games. And so once again, he did it, and he did it really in the worst fashion possible, because it wasn't so much the fact that we were saying, well, if the Houston Rockets lose to the San Antonio Spurs, that, the Houston Rockets, they should be the better team because they're they have the better players. You had picked the Houston Rockets to advance over the San Antonio Spurs. It's just that the way that James Harden played against the San Antonio Spurs inspired nothing from the rest of the guys to step up and play, which that is the most egregious way to go out in any form of a series, when it would be one thing if he laid out on the floor and he gave you 20 points, 5 assists, fouled out of the game or whatever the case may be. He turned the ball over almost as much as the shots that he took. He barely took any shots. It's like his heart wasn't in the game. I'm never going to question a guy's heart in playing the game, man. But I'm always going to question where his heart is when it comes to these type of games. And now you have to start wondering about that when it comes to James Harden, because this has been more than one occasion that we have seen this occur.
Yeah, Harden, he played for 4 games in 3 quarters. Like let's keep it 100 there. The fourth quarter and overtime of game 5, non-existent, and then he didn't show up at all in game 6. And as you alluded to, yeah, this is really like the third remarkable incident where he hasn't shown up. He didn't really show up in the NBA Finals when he was with OKC Thunder, just kind of really, wet the bed there. And then, what was it, 2 years ago in the conference finals against the Golden State Warriors, that final game, their elimination game, had 10 or 11 turnovers, most turnovers in playoff history. And then now this incident here in game 6 against the San Antonio Spurs where he doesn't show up. And then again, and for me, again, we're old school, man, and maybe we're showing our age a little bit here too, but it's like reminds me of that Progressive commercial where it's like, oh, sprinkles are for winners. Strip clubs are for winners, James. Like, strip clubs are for winners. You didn't win. You can't be out there celebrating like you just won the NBA championship after you got rocked by 35 plus points or whatever the case may be and did not show up. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And again, going back to your point about D'Antoni, how the hell do you not try to do anything?
We were talking about this, before we were recording our podcast. I know people, seem to think that when we do our thing, it's all like it's sometimes some of even our better conversations are the ones that we don't tend to have because that's how passionate we are about the game. But we were talking about this, the fact that, when your team is just playing uninspired basketball, it is up to you as the head coach to do something. You have got to do something to wake this team up, whether it's put in a player. Listen, remember we've seen times where when John Calipari sees his basketball team not even looking like they're in this game. And what does he do? He replaces the 5 starters. He just removes all 5 of them off the basketball court and goes put in the second or third unit. And what do you think that looks like to guys that are getting paid hundreds and excess of millions of dollars in national television in a playoff series, that they are playing the ugliest conceivable basketball at the worst possible time? I would think that I would be a little embarrassed by it and would want to step my game up. Certainly not go out the way that the Houston Rockets went out against the San Antonio Spurs.
Right. So for me, we're in an era of position basketball, and D'Antoni likes to say he plays kind of offensive-less basketball where he doesn't have a whole lot of plays. He's letting Harden go out there and read the game per se, and that worked for the majority of the season, but you still have to have like kind of an ace in your hole. You have to have a trick up your sleeve and have some sets and some plays and rotations that you can go to when things get rough. And, he just kind of let those guys kind of die out there. And, whatever his emergency break glass situation should have been, whether that's inserting Montrezl Harrell or Sam Dekker to try to stretch the space of the floor and get them another shooter out there on a regular basis. Like, he didn't do any of those things. And, it's tough to see them go. But, we're focusing a lot on, them getting ousted from the playoffs in the fashion that they did. I guess the next question is really what's next for them, going into the offseason.
I mean, when you look at this roster, Shaw, and I'm not saying that let's not minimize what they've achieved. I know you said that they overachieved, but I don't want to minimize what they did achieve, because what they achieved is extraordinary in my mind. I don't think that we were expecting this team to really gel as quickly as they have and to play the kind of way that D'Antoni would like to play and it have the kind of impact and effect that it have so quickly. So I think from, aesthetically speaking, this is a basketball team that can certainly replicate what they did this year. and be as equally good. Now, whether or not it means that they need to add a piece, let's remember, Shaw, the Houston Rockets have played this game before where they wanted to add a piece, right? And we put this on the shoulders of Daryl Morey to go and add a piece. And who did they add? They added Dwight Howard. And we saw how that experiment worked itself out. And we've seen these situations where the dynamic of Mike D'Antoni and his point guard and whoever else that they try and pick up in free agency don't seem to pan out. And it becomes more of a visceral relationship and guys choosing sides than coming together for a common cause, which is to try and get themselves to an NBA final, something that Mike D'Antoni has yet to achieve in his tenure in coaching.
Well, this is a very unique situation, and when I think you're looking at it from Harden's perspective and what the Rockets may need to do. So he needs the ball in his hands, right? You brought in a B-list superstar towards the tail end of his career when you brought Dwight Howard to the Houston Rockets. And that situation didn't work out. It seems to be very volatile. Now, Harden was always upset. He didn't want to be in OKC. We're not saying that he didn't want to be there, but he's looking for his starters minutes per se. And then he couldn't play alongside Russ and KD because he wasn't going to get the same touches and get the same feel. He couldn't be the same person that he is right now. Mm-hmm. It starts to beg the question is he really he needs to be the sole superstar on our team, but he's not enough to get them to a championship.
Oh, he's certainly not enough, and he's certainly not enough mentally. Right.
Yeah, and that is a very interesting question. I think Daryl Morey has to answer. They have roughly $17 million in cap space to play with. They got to figure out if they're going to bring back Nene on some sort of minimum deal and things of that nature. But the rest of this team, at least the starters, are pretty much intact. We even have Lou Williams coming off the bench for another year and going into next season. But what piece do they bring in? Capella's still developing, and it looks like he's going to be more than a serviceable center for the majority of his career. Ryan Anderson, again, questionable. But he didn't really have a great playoffs, but had a pretty decent regular season, stayed healthy for most of the year. Eric Gordon, as we already know, is going to be a Sixth Man of the Year candidate. You just kind of figure out what piece do they really, really need, because you've had Ty Lawson come in here to try to be the point guard, and Ty Lawson had his own issues and demons to deal with anyway. But that was the situation because that was taking the ball out of Harden's hands. So Patrick Beverley kind of seems to be the kind of perfect complement to that. But what piece do they need? Can they bring in that makes it all work? I mean, it's a very crazy dynamic that
it's almost a damn if you do, damn. It's almost a damn if you do, damn if you don't. Because there's two things that you brought up, Shaw, which I find is very, very interesting. One, the dynamic of James Harden and Patrick Beverley. We're going on this premise that James Harden and Patrick Beverley as a backcourt combination is considered an elite combination. Are they really an elite combination, Shaw? I mean, no, seriously, I'm asking that question in relation to the rest of the guys that we do have these combinations with. The Damian Lillards and CJ McCollums, the Steph Currys and Klay Thompson, the Kyrie Irving and hell, Iman Shumpert or J.R. Smith, Bradley Beal, John Wall, Avery Bradley, and Isaiah Thomas, Kawhi Leonard, and Tony Parker. I'm looking at this situation, and who they went through with Victor Oladipo and Russell Westbrook. What I'm saying is I'm looking at this combination, and you look at them where they fit in the totem pole, and here's James Harden, up there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever in the list of people that you want to say is best players in the NBA. And then there's Patrick Beverley. And I get the idea that you want that guy to be that bulldog, that defensive stopper, alleviates a lot of what James Harden does. But is that combination going to be efficient when you have the kind of front court that you're working with? I just don't know whether or not that's going to play. And I'm not, and no discredit to Patrick Beverley. I'm just talking about the combination of Harden and Beverley. Because if you commit to that, then there has to be an overhaul to your front court. There's no way that they can continue to have that kind of backcourt and then they may tweak a little bit of the front. There's going to be an overhaul. Either it's the backcourt or the front court. And it's got to give somewhere. Because I can't think that backcourt combination is going to be so readily dominant that's what's going to propel them past those other teams that we just talked about in the Western Conference.
Well, it really does become a matter of, again, how do they want to build their team? Do they want to try to infuse some more defense? Do they want to try to just, as I keep saying, kill it with fire and bring in more offense? The thing that they probably do need is a true backup point guard, and that has been tried, and but it hasn't been tried under D'Antoni. So, I think with his system now in place, maybe that's the direction that you go. Because Harden, he's still going to play 38 minutes a night or whatever it is, and be very ball dominant. But who can kind of give them a change of pace and then, kind of keep Harden a little bit more fresh as he enters kind of, not say the latter stage of his career, but, he's entering the prime per se, and then he's going to start to take that decline. They really ran him out there, incessantly this year. And not to say, and he ran out of energy definitely in this playoffs, especially in Game 5. So I think that's the answer, maybe a little bit, as we've talked it out, here, is that they need to look at some sort of backup point guard who can be a facilitator, but obviously they're still going to want a guy who can shoot the three and kind of be the antithesis of Beverly to a little bit degree. But to me, I still like to see them get a little bit more defense. I don't think this style is sustainable as at an NBA championship level.
They need an Iguodala. Listen, I feel like Mike D'Antoni
is supposed to be that guy for them to some degree.
Right, but he's their starter, right? And so now they're asking him. They're asking him to be, because here's my thing, Shaw. Up and down the line, James Harden, obviously is their primary scorer, and he facilitates for everyone, right? Led the NBA in assists, I think, this season, right? So here's my thing. All of these guys are contributing from an offensive perspective, but it's outside of the scope of what they primarily are asked to do in their previous roles. Because Trevor Ariza was always more of a defensive type of person. He comes here and he actually has to shoulder the burden of scoring the basketball, because you're certainly not going to ask Patrick Beverley to do this on a consistent basis. He's not like an Avery Bradley, in the scheme of things, to Mike D'Antoni. I think that he wants him to get to that point, but he's so far behind the curve from a scoring perspective that you have to keep him as your primary defender, right? So, but my thing is that when you're looking at this team, and in Capella, Capella is still raw, from an offensive perspective. He doesn't pass the basketball all that particularly well, so he can be compromised. And unless he's someone that is underneath the basket per se, he's not your Amari Stoudemire, you know what I mean, or anything like that. So, again, it's one of those situations where whoever, I at times I feel like with Mike D'Antoni, because he does not do a good enough job developing these guys to play better. It's like they sit in his system, and his system does not tend to evolve. The players then do not evolve, and eventually they become a liability. And maybe in other teams, in other places, they can thrive because they can be used for other things. I feel like, to what we were just talking about a moment ago, if you're going to have players like Trevor Ariza, then you need an Iguodala coming off the bench. You need someone coming off the bench to play effective defense that you're just not going to get if you're going to play Trevor Ariza the kind of minutes you're playing him and using him the way that you're using him offensively.
So let's look at some of the situations that they might be available to them in the offseason with their $17 million in cap space. A guy like James Johnson is available, who can play the wing and play the 3 and 4 position, defends, can shoot the 3, things of that nature, can fit into D'Antoni's system. Ilyasova doesn't really defend, but he's a guy out there. I think the best name out there potentially is probably PJ Tucker. A guy who can shoot the 3, the corner 3, but is a great wing defender and can play, guards as well too. And and they can also look at the guy who just beat them. They can try to purge Jonathan Simmons from the San Antonio Spurs and maybe bring him over there. So those are,
he is a Houston. He is originally from Houston. So
right. So those are players that that they can look at. I mean, to a lesser degree, if you want to take the chance on Andre Roberson from OKC, I guess you could potentially do that. But I think if you're looking at the wing position, those are definitely guys that can definitely help them offensively and defensively on both sides of the basketball. And I still like to see them again look at the backup point guard situation and really try to help Beverly and Harden out in that backcourt, because those guys ran out of gas, especially Harden, who carries a heavy load and is, obviously, I keep alluding to as an MVP candidate. I think those are situations where the Rockets could get better. Joe Ingles is another guy who's out there, that can help them on the wing too. So they have some options. It just depends, what do they really want to do? How do they want to build this team in D'Antoni and Harden's?
Well, I think a lot of it too, though, comes down to that commitment that you're talking about, Shaw. I often say to myself, look, I think you saw some of the pictures on Instagram, on Twitter, the mannerisms between James Harden and Mike D'Antoni. Mike D'Antoni hanging, his shoulders slumped over. He's barely holding on to the clipboard. He looks like, like someone just took a what do they call those machines? The Zambonis.
The hockey machines.
Yeah, yeah, and it looked like just rolled it right over his face, as they are, getting shellacked in that game 6 of the Western Conference semis, right, to the San Antonio Spurs. And it just comes a point that when you're Mike D'Antoni, when you lock and load for the upcoming season, that the things that you feel like this team definitely needs work on, it's not even so much a question of it being about personnel. I think often, all too often, we talk about it because we say, what do you do next? And we look at it saying picking up players. But I also look at some of the guys that are on this basketball team. Look, Clint Capella, he needs to get better. Patrick Beverley, while, listen, he played inspired basketball. Our condolences to his family due to the loss of his grandmother. But listen, man, while Patrick Beverley, at times, he can be a spark plug, he can also be a detriment to that basketball team, right? Because he can be a liability, And you bring in Lou Williams partly for that reason, because Lou Williams is an effective player. He's not a starter, but he has to come in and he has to give them something offensively that Patrick Beverley still has not been able to do consistently. And maybe that's part of what it is. Maybe that's just not the expectations. But if you're Mike D'Antoni, you've got to start putting these guys in a position to say, look, if we're going to get to an NBA Finals, I need you guys to work on A, B, C, and D. And that's one of the things that I tend to fear when they're under the D'Antoni system, is that a lot of these guys do not develop and evolve. They stay in their place or they stay in their lane. And when they don't even achieve what they're supposed to achieve as the players they are in the D'Antoni system, all they do is they go in to replace them with somebody else, which doesn't necessarily fix the problem.
Well, I mean, I think that's a hard assessment, though, Cal, because he's made some guys a lot of money just because he's turned them into offensive players, per se. I mean, I'll never forget the case of Jody Meeks. Jody Meeks is not a good basketball player, but he played in LA in D'Antoni's system and got a millions of dollars contract from the Detroit Pistons and has been hurt ever since. So I think certain players have attributed, especially if they have a skill set that he can utilize. But some of this roster maybe not be best fit for what he's trying to do, and I think that's what the question is. So you have to wonder, like, okay, Sam Dekker, who played some plus minutes for them, he was a guy who seemed to be matriculating well through their system. So can he get better? Then Montrezl Harrell, he played well. Harrell played well when Capella was injured, and he did his thing. So there are guys there, but the rest of this roster is kind of devoid. There's not a lot of talent.
Sure, I completely get you. But again, you actually you emphasize my point. A guy like Sam Dekker, who he did not play at all through the course of this series. Right? So my thing is, what are your expectations? This guy is on your roster. I understand that there's going to be opportunity to get guys like PJ Tucker and others. What I'm saying is that you've got guys on this roster. Montrezl Harrell. There's a reason why these guys were still on your roster leading up to the playoffs, or else you would have made them inactive. My point is when are you going to get these guys to play better in your system? Because that to me has always been an issue that I have had with Mike D'Antoni, is that he doesn't get certain guys that you're looking at saying, you know what, maybe if he played this person, he might be able to give you something. Like, what exactly is it that is completely so going far away? And I understand it's the playoffs. I'm not just looking at the playoffs. I'm just looking at it in totality with Mike D'Antoni in comparison to other veteran NBA coaches who eventually you can sit here and keep replacing players, but at some point, these players are going to have to evolve. They're going to have to be something. Because if not that, then you got to be looking at what is the coach actually getting these guys to do in the offseason that is equating to them not doing anything when they come back after having the kind of season that the Houston Rockets have had, which is, in your case, as you said, they've overachieved.
All right. Well, I'm going to shout out my guy, Irv Rowland, who's one of their player development guys, and he helped Harden kind of see some of the great things that he could do offensively this year and really work with him in the offseason. I think Irv is a guy who's going to play a big role in the development of some of the other players on that team. And as we alluded to, the Harrells and the Sam Dekkers, if you will. But again, they have a little bit of cap space, so they can get some help that they may not be able to develop from within. But they're in a good situation in terms of, being a team that can be a perennial playoff team, especially with this style. But they have to have some minor tweaks if they want to get to that next level and next step. And we're not trying to bash the Rockets, for having the season they had, but it is unfortunate the way they went out, and really just couldn't go out with the same heart and spunk that they played with in the entire regular season. So kudos to D'Antoni and James Harden specifically for getting this far, but you got to seal the deal, man. You got to finish it off. And even if you lose valiantly. You know what I mean? Don't lose like that, where it just seems like you're looking at a loss. You said D'Antoni's on the sideline with his shoulder slumped over. Harden's not even taking shots in the first half. Like, that cannot be the way you go out. And this is where, again, I'm not going to, try to make the hard comparison. But when you talk about, Westbrook compared to Harden in terms of the MVP, like, that wouldn't have been Russ, one way or the other. So, and you can knock Russ for taking too many shots, but that wouldn't have been him going out with two shots in the first half.
Listen, no one would have faulted James Harden for taking 30 shots. Not, you know what I'm saying? No one would have faulted him for taking 30 shots if the rest of his team ain't scoring the basketball. It would have been just like, look, because the thing that you could at least said, Shaw, is that would have been justified is the fact that, well, James Harden led the team and led the league in assists. So it isn't as if, hey, he didn't give his guys opportunities to make shots. It just didn't make shots. So he had to be the one, he had to be a ball hog. You know what I'm saying? So
it's unfortunate for me to see, though, like, a lot of people lost faith in him. And again, and you lose a little bit as well, too. But a lot of people are like, listen, they'll never look at Harden the same after this. And again, with it being kind of
because numbers are not going to prove or disprove what we saw from him. You go and you look at just the way that the game played itself out, and you can clearly see his heart wasn't in that game, man. For whatever reason, after that first quarter, his heart wasn't in that game. And that's just
within the strippers. You know what I mean? You think about flashing them dollar bills and them 20s and them $100, in the strip club out there, man. He was gone. It was a goner. And that is something that I think is a mental approach that he needs to improve upon and understand, to be an NBA champion, not just an MVP candidate, to be an NBA champion. There's a certain level of competitiveness that you have to have throughout and never give up and never die, no matter what the situation is. And again, he just seemed, like you said, he was done. Like I said, four games and 3 quarters where we saw Harden in this last series.
All right, well, James Harden's mind was all up on that cottage cheese. But for us here at the Baseline NBA podcast, we're going to have to pass out some Velveeta cheese for him. So to the Houston Rockets, unfortunately, listen, great season all around. 3rd seed in the NBA Western Conference playoffs, got to the semifinals, clearly lost to the better team. Certainly did not want to go out the way that you went out, but still a great season, well-deserved. But it's time for y'all to hitch up that wagon. And in the immortal words of our man, go on Git. Shaw, excellent show. A lot we went down and discussed, broke down the matchup between the Spurs and the Warriors. That's going to be a great series. I think, hopefully it'll be a series that lives up to the hype if Kawhi Leonard is at least somewhere around the 80-90% level. Listen, any ankle injury, we look at it in the same way we looked at Steph Curry. You're never going to be 100% in the playoffs after an ankle injury. But I do think that the way that these two teams play, their contrast of styles, certainly can make for who is going to impose whose will. And those are always great matchups to look forward to. And it's definitely going to be one of those type of matchups where, these teams are going to beat each other up. It may play to the advantage of the Cleveland Cavaliers, or it may strengthen and embolden whoever is coming out of the Western Conference that they should be wanting to take down the Cleveland Cavaliers, whoever, and maybe we're talking about it out of turn a little bit, saying that the Cavaliers eventually will get to the finals. But I'm just saying that whatever happens, whoever's representing out of the East, it could certainly be whoever's coming out of the West is either going to be emboldened or so beaten up they might not have enough in the tank to finish the run.
Well, I think from the San Antonio perspective, I think it was discussed prior to the playoffs beginning that they would have potentially the hardest path to the NBA Finals into a championship than any other team. And I think that's proven to be true. So Memphis was a huge test. The Rockets were a great test. And now Golden State might be the ultimate test, especially coming out of the Western Conference nevertheless. So if they're able to, get this done somehow and upset the Warriors, and again, they would, to me, kind of have to be the favorites because you just feel like, they're building all this chemistry and momentum going into the NBA Finals. Right. But that said, Golden State, I think this is San Antonio's their tune-up, if you will. And I think we're still headed to the ultimate, rematch of rematches, if you will, the rubber match between the Golden State Warriors and Cleveland Cavaliers when all is said and done. Again, you just want to see a competitive series, and I think San Antonio will give us that. I don't see them getting worked out and, getting just swept in any way, shape, or form. No matter how long the series goes, I still think it will be competitive, but you just hope Kawhi is completely healthy and able to give his best throughout the entire series.
Most definitely. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for tuning in to the Baseline NBA podcast. Like we said earlier in our show, be sure to hit us up. We always appreciate the comments. Definitely give us a shout out through ratings. Download the platform, man. Subscribe and listen to the show. We're definitely going to be giving you our analysis, and hopefully we'll also get feature people on board as we continue to plow our way through to the NBA Finals. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do, and we'll catch up with you next time.